Excellent. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. And good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you're located. And welcome to today's webcast, How Hilo Built Hydro Quebec's First Virtual Power Plant Through Partnerships. My name is Eric Muller, and I'm the Director of Engagement at Quest Canada. Quest Canada is a nonprofit supporting communities on their pathway to net zero. We're really happy to have you all joining from across the country today. And I'm happy to report that we've seen a ton of interest in today's event, which is a great sign. Just a heads up to all of you that this webcast is being recorded, and we will have it publicly available on the Quest Canada website after today's event. So we're really excited to have some leading energy innovators with us today. And I'll quickly introduce them and we'll get right into the conversation. So joining us today, we have David Saint-Germain. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Hilo. And Hilo is a subsidiary of Hydro Quebec. And it is building out Quebec's first decentralized, province-wide, and ever-growing virtual power plant. We also have Sherif Zaroubi, CEO and partner at Axeta. Axeta is an IoT consulting firm helping grid operators integrate new DERs, as well as equipment manufacturers convert their products into DER solutions. And by the way, I know probably most of you are in this world of IoT in DERs, but IoT being Internet of Things and DERs being distributed energy resources, just in case, just to put it out there. So David and Sherif, we're really happy to have you with us today to talk about this relevant and timely and exciting topic. So just a quick announcement for the participants here today. The format for today's webcast will be a conversational dialogue between myself and our speakers, and we'll have a couple of visuals here and there just to show you what things look like. And as a heads up to all of you, I'll pause partway through today's conversation to bring your questions and comments in about halfway through the beginning, and we'll also have time at the end for Q&A as well. So just how can you pose your questions and put your comments out there? There are a couple of ways you can do this. You can, number one, you can type them in the chat, and we'll keep our eyes on the chat and bring those forward. And you can also use the raise hand feature in the Teams toolbar at the very top. There's a reactions button and there's a raise hand feature that you can click there. And that'll flag for us that you want to ask a question or make a comment live. You can do that live and unmute yourself and have a more interactive experience with our presenters today. So I'll make sure to call on you when you've raised your hand at the question times throughout today's webcast. So that's all the housekeeping that I needed to set the table with at the beginning. So I'm excited for us to really dive into today's conversation. So let's do that right now. So we're going to start things off by talking about the industry and business challenge that really drove the innovation at Hilo and this virtual power plant in Quebec. So I'm going to start with David and pose the question: what was the business challenge that you faced, and what was the catalyst that started Hilo? Over to you, David.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, that's a really good question, and there's multiple layers to the answer. I think with COP27 ongoing right now, we all have climate change on our minds, and you've probably all seen over the years a graph that looks a little bit like what I'm going to show right now, where you have CO2 levels, really gaining traction with a seasonal pattern that you can see as a seesaw here, where you have green plants absorbing CO2 during the summer growth season and then releasing that CO2, and you have industry and consumption also contributing to the CO2 curves. And this is really going up over time in a very dramatic fashion. So on the right side here, you have a graph that shows you global average temperatures increasing from 1880 up until today. And we're already topping over the 1 degree Celsius augmentation of that average global temperature. So of course, one of our main concerns in Quebec is decarbonization and how we translate that into action. And one of the main aspects of that is to electrify transport. So electrifying transport, just like adding wind and solar to the ecosystem, adds volatility to the energy consumption and production patterns, right? You have like spikiness because of clouds going, between yourself, the sun, and the solar panels. You have wind that has varying patterns over the day and over weeks. And you have behavioral aspects to electrifying transport where people come back from work and will plug in at the same time at night, and those will drive spikes in consumption on the networks. So this volatility is something that's really hard to address. It's a distributed problem, and there's traditional ways of doing it. Network operators have been doing it for decades and even a century now. But there's new patterns emerging and there's new technologies emerging that allow you to control that more finely. So the first problem that we actually took a look at, the short-term one, is weather-related spikiness. It's the weather peak consumption events that come with cold weather spells, where we have huge amounts of power draw because people turn on heating at the same time as they're taking their showers in the morning or they're using their appliances. And that really creates an unbalance at the grid level that needs to be compensated either by buying electricity, starting up, peaker plants, or doing all kinds of other means to control that power. What we actually tried to figure out was, can we control that in a new way? Can we control it by gaining access to devices in people's homes, such as smart thermostats that control line heating heaters? And we decided to launch a pilot in 2019 to try to achieve that. So we developed our own in-house line voltage thermostats that could be controlled through a hub. And we started deploying that in 1,000 houses to test out the model and figure out whether we could actually achieve control with the delays and the network characteristics that we were trying to get to. So that's, of course, a very complex scenario to implement to actually try to support decarbonization. But it's not the only scenario that we are trying to solve for. We also have to support growth, organic growth of consumption on the distribution network, which can overload different equipments and can require you to spend a lot of cash flow to oversize your network to be able to handle those peaks. So let's say you have a hub in a neighborhood that's overloaded, you have a transformer that's nearing its capacity, and it's nearing its capacity only during those cold spells or only during certain times of day. Are you going to replace that transformer, or can you actually curtail and manage power in a more efficient way to defer that investment? So that's another scenario that we were looking at, which is kind of a more midterm scenario. The other aspect to it is, we really want to try to onboard all of these new technologies in the most efficient way possible by making people not have to think about it. People right now in Quebec pay a flat fee for electricity. It's one of the cheapest energy prices in the world. And keeping it that way requires you to be super efficient in the way that you manage your network. So it's a long-winded answer, but I think there's a few parameters in there that support the model that we were trying to put up.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. Sharif, do you want to weigh in a little bit about this business challenge that David mentioned, and kind of your perspective on the business challenge and the catalyst for getting this innovative project started?
Well, what I can speak to, Eric, and thank you very much, by the way. What I could speak to, Eric, is we really took to the core the mission that Hilo had, and we really wanted to help within that direction. I actually had a question for David, if I may. Do you think one of the catalysts was when there's a power failure or a grid failure in a specific neighborhood? How does that impact the distribution network, and what type of solutions do you think that Hilo could bring to that?
Well, that's actually one of the reasons why we started developing our own thermostats, right? There's parameters to control that really tie into long-term patterns, such as weather. So you can predict 24 hours beforehand that there's going to be a cold spell, and you can send commands to the IoT devices beforehand in order to control them during those cold spells. But when you're coming back from a power failure, you need really quick response times. You need something to be embedded on the device to trigger within milliseconds of power coming back in order to apply a ramps. So when we designed the thermostats, we embedded some firmware components and some hardware components in the thermostats to allow us to resolve those time constraints, right, and be able to respond really quickly when you come back from a power failure. So that's actually one of the things that got into the business case. You know, I think I forgot one thing when I was answering you earlier, Eric. It's that we're trying to drive energy efficiency at the same time as we're trying to put out solutions that allow you to control peak demand. And looking at the Quebec market, you know, electrifying transport will add about 50% load to the grid by 2050. That's a huge amount of energy to convert from fossil fuels to electricity. And at the same time, you have population growth, you have businesses growing. So in Hydro Quebec's plan from 2020 to 2030, we're trying to add or actually subtract 8 terawatt hours of consumption from the network through energy efficiency initiatives. And we're also trying to curtail about, if I'm not mistaken, 2.5 gigawatts of peak power. So Hilo can't do it alone. Behavioral systems can't do it alone. We need a concerted effort from all actors of society, of industry, to try to achieve these numbers. And, you know, I think, and we can get into it later, but there's a nice complementarity between purely behavioral systems and technical DR or automated systems. I think we're getting into that a bit later in the
Excellent. No, that's great. Thank you for those are big numbers. Those are big numbers you just mentioned. So not an easy task. And you know, I think it's a great segue, as you mentioned. You can't do it alone. Nobody can do it alone. And in the theme of partnerships and solutions here, my next question, I think, for both of you and whoever wants to start is, how did you talked about the challenge, you talked about the catalyst, you've got this big goal in front of you from Hydro Quebec that kind of got Hilo started. How did you approach the challenge in terms of partnerships and solutions? Who did you get to help? Obviously, we've got Axeta here as well. How did you approach that, and how did you bring in these partners to not go it alone, to really actually tackle this in a more efficient and innovative way?
There's kind of a chicken and egg conundrum there where, you know, with utilities, you have to prove out that things are very reliable, very solid. And that's kind of the opposite of being a startup, right? And making mistakes and trying to learn about how to deploy solutions. So to kind of mitigate between the two, you need a way to accelerate your deployment. And you need a way to maybe balance out the cost of your system. It's going to cost a little bit more, but you can go faster at the beginning, and then you can optimize your cost over the long run. So when we actually started the pilot, the 1,000 houses I was talking about earlier, we had to develop hardware, we had to develop connectivity solutions, we had to develop a cloud ecosystem, a mobile app, and everything needed to be tied in together with network control so that when they did send curtailing events, those curves and those characteristics that we needed to follow would be respected. And then we could measure out the results of that and prove that we were solving the business need. So when you have a very short time frame, 6 months or 8 months, to build out a proof of concept like this, you need to rely on partners that have expertise. And maybe, Sherry, if you can give a bit of
For sure,
a bit of background on your expertise there.
and there was one keyword that I think was missing in some of the constraints we were looking at, which is security as well.
For
You know,
sure.
you could move fast, but whenever you touch anything related to the electrical network or to the power network, you need to think about security, especially with what's happening in the world right now. I mean, so some of the challenges that are involved, Eric, is in normal tech projects, you usually have a chasm between tech and business. And whenever it comes to IoT, and I think David mentioned a few of the components, you have the hardware side, so the electronics, you've got the software side, you've got the network connectivity, the security, the cloud, the control systems, and then we're going to dive into the AI and the ML for smart and automated controls. That within all of these sets of expertise, you've got chasms in there as well, and you need to go get partners around you that can either help you glue all of those languages together, or that can go deep inside of one of these spheres and kind of give you give you support to help you move fast. You know, and I could talk about some of the partners that we've worked with at Hilo, and we're very open to working with partners. One of them being, Microsoft gave a great helping hand, and that touches kind of the point that David was making. If you want to move fast, you kind of have to stand on the shoulder of giants, or build on top of something that exists. And the cloud today, we've looked at different clouds at the beginning, but the cloud that we decided to recommend was the Azure cloud, because the IoT stack that was involved was more open, more malleable, more flexible, and had all of the security already built in for what we were trying to achieve. And we wanted to really build on top of that platform as well. So we worked very well with Microsoft. There were other consulting firms that were there to help out at Hilo. Let's not take the full credit, but no, I think I think I answered the question there, Eric.
Yeah, definitely. And
requires, go ahead.
Yeah, as you said, sorry to interrupt, as you said, finding that solid foundation that's already built up and has that security, as you mentioned with Azure, but also to David's point, and you mentioned as well, Sharif, is how did you partner so quickly, move so quickly, and still feel confident about being entrepreneurial, taking risks, and help, Hilo's parent company feel comfortable with that in this highly, regulated environment?
It's all about culture. I'm sorry, David. I think there was a huge cultural fit between our two organizations that made it happen. We have a very good rapport with David. We've worked in the startup world a lot. We've worked with larger organizations. David had worked in the startup world as well. We had a very common language and a very we were very aligned on how things should be operated and how the teams should function, and we were able to surf on the same wave together in a complementary manner. Go ahead, David.
And there's a notion of risk that needs to be weighed against the size of your deployment, right? When you have 1,000 houses deployed, you can't destabilize the grid. When you have 200,000 houses deployed, then of course you're a target for state actors and you have other concerns. So as a startup, you have to keep that in mind. If you start by closing things up, you will fail. You need to take risks, and you need to be able to weigh those risks against the rewards. And proving out a model as complex as what we're trying to deploy right now is it's not easy, especially because we have to integrate with so many partners. So, talking about partnerships, yes, we can rely on different companies that have great expertise, but we also need to interface our systems with other market players, smart charging component manufacturers, other thermostat manufacturers, different solutions that allow you to control street lighting, for instance. And they are not at the same maturity level as a utility in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of scaling. So every integration is a discussion. And it's about finding a balance between achieving results, proving out a concept, and then industrializing it over a few phases of deployment. Maybe I can illustrate a little bit of what we're building by showing a slide I spoke a little bit about the control ecosystem. We put a label on that. We call it a virtual power plant. And what a virtual power plant is, it's a way to orchestrate a whole bunch of devices that can be spread all over different geographies to act as a single device with regards to the utility. So the utility can call the virtual power plant and say, please curtail according to these parameters. And then the virtual power plant will be the brain of the ecosystem, basically, and take care of orchestrating all of those different characteristics of the electric devices themselves to put them together and achieve a result. So schematically, what this looks like is you have a control center on the grid side at Hydro Quebec. You have a distributed energy resource management system, which also lives in the Hydro Quebec ecosystem, which controls all of the devices on the 25 kilovolt distribution network. So, whether those are small solar plants or wind or other assets that sit on those large networks. But the DERMS also controls the virtual power plant as a single unit. So the virtual power plant appears as a single large DER for the DERMS. And under the virtual power plant, you have the Hilo aggregators, which are our own in-house solutions that provide, residential solutions, so which will aggregate between heating and water heaters and smart car chargers, but also commercial and institutional solutions, which will control large buildings, schools, hospitals, and everything else with a different technology stack. That's what we developed internally. And now we're opening up to other partners in the industry. You have great examples on the Quebec market of technology providers that have this flexibility of opening up their ecosystems and working with us to find the best parameters to get real-time telemetry back from their ecosystems into the VPP so that we can get that back into the grid. So this discussion is really interesting right now, and I think we might get into that in later questions, but there's really a lot of stuff missing to get this to be fluid and to get it to be picked up at the international level. We don't have clear interoperability parameters that are defined by the industry. We have some OpenEDR and IEEE 2030.5 protocols out there, but they're not really flexible, and I don't think they're at the level that they need to be at for us to really integrate with all the industry players.
Thank you for that. And by the way, that was the best, that was the best definition at a high level of VPPs I've heard in a very long time. So thank you so much for that, David. And you know what? I think we will take a moment here as we, we've talked about the business challenge. We've talked about how, partnerships and coming together has helped to address this and work to address it. And we'll get into some of the outcomes that you're seeing already and how it's going and where the future looks. I think we will take a moment, though, now to put it to this great audience of 75 people here that have joined, and so glad you're all here. Now's your chance, and we'll have more chances at the end as well, but now's your chance halfway through to throw your question in the chat. There's the chat at the top. There's a Q&A function if you want to use that, either one. But you can also click the reaction button and raise your hand. Click the raise hand if you want to ask a question live. So now's your chance to do that. And we'll just take a moment to, let people formulate their questions and comments here on what you've heard so far. So we'll keep our eyes open. Okay, so first one is, how do you integrate 2030.5 or maybe 2035 within your environment?
So that's an interesting question, because 2030.5 is mostly used for inverter control, and it's used for many different purposes for inverter controls. There's the California Rule 21 aspect, which you guys might be familiar with, which allow you to parameterize remotely the network stability characteristics of your inverters. So to say, what is your what voltage curve response, and how do you respond to frequency variations on the network autonomously at the inverter level. And 2030.5 allows you to send parameters down hierarchically with regards to your grid topology to all of these connected inverters that act as nodes in that topology, so that you can specify to them different parameters for different types of equipments that they're plugged into. So we have not implemented that yet. It's part of our architectural plan as EVs roll out and as vehicle to home becomes more prevalent to have these capabilities plugged into the VPP. The way that it's going to be done is through hierarchical cascading. So the DERMS ecosystem will be able to specify parameters to the VPP, and then the VPP will handle all of the connectivity and the abstraction in terms of how to deliver that to the different end devices through the different partner channels that we're going to have. Some of them will be connected directly to our VPP because the device will be plugged in the home on the Wi-Fi network or the Zigbee network, and it can connect directly to our backend. And some others will trickle through the clouds of partners. So let's say you have a car manufacturer who also manufactures car charging components for the house, and those connect to their cloud directly. Well, then you need a way to cascade that through their cloud. So it always comes back to that authentication, security aspects of connecting to a third party's cloud, and then the telemetry aspect and the command and control aspects. Those are like the three pillars of any integration for these types of protocols. I don't know if that kind of answers the question, but
for sure. No, and I think knowing the audience, I'm sure people probably really appreciate that technical detail that I think a lot of people are living and breathing. So maybe a quick answer here. Have you selected a DERM software platform? Yes or no? And maybe briefly what that might be, if you can share.
So we're not responsible for selecting the DERMS platform. That happens at Hydro Quebec. We're a subsidiary. We provide the VPP ecosystem. So I think that's a question that should be answered by Hydro directly.
Okay, great. I think I'll take a couple more here and then we'll continue. And then as a reminder to the crowd, to the audience, we'll also be doing this in the second half of the hour today. So we'll get more Q&A there. What hardware was your home device based on? And was the in-home device sold to customers of Hydro Quebec or provided free of charge? And how did you handle privacy and warranty requirements? I'm not sure where that stage is at with the in-home device, but maybe you can.
And there's a few in-home devices, if I may. There's a few in-home devices, right? There's the thermostats that'll control, the consumption of power. There's the home gateway that controls basically the home controller that's going to take care of connecting and bringing all of the data and controls back to the cloud. And there's also some new devices that are being designed. And I think we started off with custom built electronics. David, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. We started off with custom built electronics, and we brought in some partners, as David was talking about, regarding the car chargers and some of the other devices. Then for the commercial aspect, David, feel free to. So the question is, are they given to customers or are they free of charge? And how do you handle privacy and warranty requirements around that?
Yeah. So if we go back to my initial answer, I think 10 minutes ago, we built our own thermostats upfront because we had specific requirements that the market couldn't provide, right? We don't want to substitute for the market. The market is there, and the market needs to be the driver to get penetration of these devices to be as wide as we want it to be. But to prove out the model over those 1,000 houses, we had to have something that actually met our requirements. So to get really technical, these are little ARM-based computers, right? There's super small chips that run in there, and we have embedded firmware that runs on the thermostats. And we have a residential hub that we developed, which is Zigbee enabled, that connects to these end devices that we manufactured, but which also connects to the smart meter in the house. And that's what provides our real-time energy information for the whole house. So it's actually interesting because we have the whole house picture, and then we have the energy streams coming in from the different devices that we control. And since those represent the highest consuming devices in the house, we have a pretty good granular picture of what's happening. And that's going to be important later on when I talk about our coaching systems. So we developed this ecosystem for the residential side, but let's not forget the commercial side, where things are quite different. On the commercial side, we have buildings that have BMS systems deployed in them to control HVAC and to control lighting and everything else. And these BMS systems are typically disconnected from the internet. So one of our challenges was, how do we provide connectivity to the building, and how can we bridge the cloud world and the Modbus and BACnet low-level protocol world that you can find in buildings. So we deployed our own small industrial computer, if you will, in the buildings with a cellular modem tied to it. And we coded our own interface stack in there that bridges those two worlds. And that's how we control buildings. So from the commercial side, we want to reduce the friction of deploying these technologies, right? You don't want this to be a technology play. You don't want this to be something that people think of as being complicated. You want it to be as simple and as straightforward as possible for anyone to get these devices and not have to think about how you set them up, how they run. Do I need to parameterize them? Like, that needs to be abstracted away behind a very simple interface. So in that sense, what we offer people is fully managed solution. They come to our website, they select the size of their house, we go to their house, an electrician actually puts in all the devices and leaves a functional house. And then the person only has to put in their automations that they want. Like, I want my lights to turn off when I leave the house. I want my heating to turn on when I wake up in the morning. And our virtual power plant ecosystem is transparently tied to that as a layer. The user doesn't perceive it. They program their house, and our VPP applies differential components over the top of that in a transparent manner. So when someone goes through a cold spell in the winter, what they want to say is, am I someone who gets cold really easily, or do I want to maximize the cash rewards that I want to get and do a -6 degrees Celsius on my ecosystem? But once they've done that, they don't want to think about it, right? It needs to run over the programs that the user has set themselves without the user being aware of it. So that's what we're trying to achieve. And our whole ecosystem is designed commercially to be that way, to be transparent and to be as easy to use as possible.
David,
thank you for that.
If I may, sorry, Eric, on top of there, because I feel like a part of the question was not necessarily developed there. It was regarding the giving or the selling of the devices, and I think that ties into user engagement, David, if I'm not mistaken. If it's my understanding that that the devices are not given out for free, right?
The devices are not given out for free. We want to keep people engaged over the period of a contract. So it's a little bit like a cell phone and your carrier company. But in the end, once that contract is done, you don't want people to churn, right? You want people to stay engaged. And right now we have a 98% participation rate over the 3-year period that we've been launched. And when I compare that to programs I've seen in the US where participation is 65, 70%, I think the hardware part and the rebates that we give upfront might get people in the ecosystem, but that's not what's going to keep them in there. What's going to keep them in there is the quality of the experience that they go through. So you could have many types of engagement models to get people into that funnel. Then you need to keep them there.
Wonderful. Thanks for putting that in there. And lots of other great questions coming in, but I'm going to keep us moving along. So Matthew in the chat, thank you for those. We'll jump to maybe 1 or 2 of your questions later on, as well as Vince. I do want to move us into a part of the conversation around, David and Sharif, you both mentioned this has been in market, in flight. It's happening over the last 3 years. And so where is where is it now at a high level? Where is Hilo now? Are there any high level results or findings or learnings from these last 3 years that that you might be able to share with the group today?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the key ones, I think, is the fact that behavioral and technical DR systems are not, opposite sides of the same coin. They're complementary. They're a funnel. And as a utility, you need to think about a product market fit. You need to think about the way that you're going to generate results as quickly and with the least amount of investment as possible. And that's behavioral DR, right? That's the low friction entry point of anybody in the system. And once those people are in, then you have to be data driven. You have to figure out, okay, I've got the tech geeks and the people that love to run Excel spreadsheets that are going to be my top 20% performers, and they're going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread because they're going to generate a lot of value for low investment, and they're going to be providing that without all of the hardware expenses and the automation systems and everything. But then you have the rest of the pool of users that might not be as resilient in the system. So they might churn, or they might disengage over time, or they might not even understand what you're trying to achieve. I have to follow a price signal, or what am I going to do with my water heater? What am I going to do with my car charger? So that's where automation kicks in, right? And you want the automation not to be something to be as greedy as possible and get the user to, give over their rights to their house. And what happened in Texas last year or 2 years ago, where people got their thermostats overridden by the utility, and that kind of, I think a lot of people did not feel that that was the right approach. But what you want to do with automation is give the power back to the user so that they can participate like a behavioral user without you encroaching on their freedom or their rights in their house, but in a way that maximizes economic benefits for both sides. So the Hilo system is exactly that. We want people to feel comfortable so that at the end of that 3-year engagement, they stay with us and they actually find a value to the system. They don't even think about it anymore. So that's one of the great learnings, is that these programs that live inside of utilities, typically these behavioral programs, are really intermeshed with the automatic systems. And you need to think of the user journey through all of that. You need to think of the funnel and reduce the friction to be able to convert users from one to the other if they're not performing well, either in the technical DR or in the behavioral system.
If I can add on top of that, David, I think you've mentioned a few things that touched a bit of the brand promise that you make to your clients and to the users. One is the user should remain comfortable. The second one that I've heard was that it should be economically beneficial for the customer as well. There should be a gain there, and the user and the customer journey and the experience should be as smooth and as great as possible. One of the key learnings, Eric, that I would add over the last 3 years would be that has to be clear to the technical team and to the product development teams what that promise is. And as you grow the team, because the team has scaled up like crazy over the past 3 years, that has to be kind of constantly repeated and reminded to the people. And the reason why I think Hilo was able to achieve that is that communication of what the brand promise was really taken seriously. And we, there was good product management teams involved that kind of reminded everyone, we got to make sure the user is comfortable. When we offload or we do energy shifting or demand shifting, the spikes that you do it between 4 and 6 in the morning can't surpass the spikes between 6 and 9 in the morning. He can't have a higher electricity bill just because you've moved a demand around. So those were very conscious cultural things that were given to the team as well. So I would say that that's a good learning as well. And the product mindset versus the project mindset is not necessarily something that that large institutions traditionally have, and that's something that comes more from the startup world. And that cultural shift there is not always as smooth as you'd want it to be, but I think it was something that was done well within the Hilo team.
Thank you for adding that. And of course, yeah, if I play it back from what I'm hearing, especially around those technical folks internally, keeping them all aligned to that same North Star as you just described, that brand promise, and really, laser focused on the customer experience throughout this.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
if I may, and some of the challenges on top of that is that, the tech stack that you have for 1,000 homes is not the same tech stack that you have for the following winter, which is, I'm not going to go into numbers because I'm dyslexic with numbers, and then which is not the same tech stack that you have for the following winter, right? And the reality in Quebec is that we have 4 seasons, but the majority of the time that you can build out and stabilize your system on the tech side of things is during the fall, the spring, the summer, and the fall months. And you want to give yourself enough leeway prior to winter to ensure that quality is there, because one of the key tenets for user experience is whenever I turn my app, I expect it to be on. If I increase the thermostat on my app, it should increase in my room. If I ask my little Google Home speaker here to raise the temperature, it should do it, right? So that requires a stable system. That requires a system that scales well. And your window of opportunity to bring in those changes is just very small. So it kind of ties in all of that together, all of that complexity together, and just the ramp up that the team at Hilo had in terms of staff, trying to keep the culture in place, trying to make sure the teams are structured correctly. That was I think one of the challenges over the past 3 years that I've really enjoyed help David solve.
Yeah.
They're fun
Wonderful.
problems.
And as it continues to grow, I mean, David, when we've spoken, and Sharif, I've heard about some of the numbers. You mentioned the gigawatts, you mentioned the terawatt hour goals, but also, number of homes and what that's going to look like, and also the commercial and industrial side of things. So, basically, kind of taking us to another question here to kind of round things out. Maybe go to you first, David. So what's next for Hilo? What does the future look like in terms of future growth and opportunities and trends?
Sure. The ecosystem is getting more complex every day, and we're having trouble keeping up, right? That's one of the biggest challenges. You have different segments of the market that are not even addressed yet, which I'm waiting for some creative startups to get into. And if any of you are listening right now, come and talk to me. But we're trying to control things over a very wide scope of technologies and experiences. When you look at people that live in condos and they're in a high-rise tower and their smart meters are in the basement, you're looking at a completely different set of parameters than when you're a single residential house, in a single family house, where you can actually pair your smart meter to the hub that we put in the house. So your user experience is going to be very different in these types of scenarios. The same thing goes for fleet management. When you have like vehicles that you need to plug in and you need to manage their ability to be ready for business the next day. You want to drive 150 kilometers with your building, then you need to be able to parameterize that into the system so that you don't curtail demand and take away from that autonomy. You have a lot of these scenarios. Supporting overloaded infrastructure, coaching on the energy efficiency side. That's one is one of the big ones that we're going to be focusing on for the next year. We're sitting on the data of the whole house. We have the real-time data from the meter, and we have the real-time data from all of the different components in the house. How do you use that to enable the user to understand what they need to change to be more efficient? How do you use pattern recognition or even just expert systems to guide the user to add different types of programmings to their house? How do you get them to lower the temperature at night and not feel cold? These are all small problems that have huge gains if you apply them over millions of houses. And there's an interesting tidbit that we learned last summer when we were looking at the data. 20% of our users were heating during the summer. they had their heaters on during the summer. And at first we thought it's a bug in our system. That can't be, that can't be right. And we have something messed up. We screwed up. We're gonna be all over the news, But when we started digging into it, no, this is real behavior from users that want to dehumidify their basements, or that don't understand the interplay between their AC system and their thermostats. So people kept, the temperature at 18 degrees Celsius, and then they had the AC running at cooler than that, and they were actually heating at the same time as they were cooling their house. So these are things that you can help the user notice, and you can drive huge efficiency gains just by doing this type of stuff.
Great. And sorry, David, to jump in. I just am thinking about leaving a bit of extra time as well for another set of questions, but maybe Sharif, is there any other anything very briefly you might want to add on what does the future look like? What's next when it comes to Hilo?
David spoke a bit about some of the business side of things. We mentioned a bit earlier, to be able to move fast, you need to stand on the shoulder of giants and not necessarily optimize your costs at first for your infrastructure. I think the future leads into more of a cost optimization and kind of reducing some of those costs involved in operating the platform, and making sure it's equally as secure as it currently is.
Fantastic.
And the last point is ensuring that the architecture is as flexible and agile as possible to kind of bring in all of these partners that you want to bring in, because integrating with a new partner should not take 6 months. It should be a very fast and efficient process, especially if you're going to be repeating it with multiple. So how do you simplify that process? How can tech and architecture simplify that process for you? So that's, I think, what the focus should be.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, now's everybody's chance for the next 10 minutes. I'm glad we did questions halfway through as well, just because I think there's a lot of interest. Matthew, I didn't forget about you. So you did ask a number of questions, so I think I'll have to just pick one or two, and you can connect with David and Sharif afterwards. So will Hilo be supporting OpenADR? And is there a roadmap for aggregator partners?
We do support OpenADR for some scenarios already. OpenADR is not as flexible as we would like for some of the scenarios that we're looking for. It's a very constraining reporting structure. It's not made for real-time reporting. And what we're driving towards with our architecture is for real-time bidirectional command and control fluxes between the cloud and the devices. We want things to be as low latency as possible. So depending on the use case that you're thinking of, we could talk about that and figure out, what's the best approach. But for most of our integrations, we're talking about protocols that we've implemented on the side, which are not OpenADR based. We're reserving OpenADR for the link between the utility and the VPP, rather than between the VPP and the end devices.
The DRs.
The use case is the first market segment that is not addressed that you mentioned, the condo towers, which share just one electric meter. So
well, let's stop that here.
Thank you for this today.
Thank you, Mathieu. So I don't know if you spoke to it either, Sharif or David, but roadmap for aggregators. Anything further on that? What that might look like?
In terms of integrations, in terms of opening up, well, I'll take it as I interpret it. We want to integrate with as many aggregation partners as possible, as quickly as possible. But of course, we have to prioritize. So prioritization is done according to market penetration and cost of implementation. I mean, it's a business decision, right? So we need to figure out what will drive the most megawatts back to Hydro Quebec in the quickest way possible. These are public numbers, but Hilo has to deliver 620 megawatts of curtailing by 2028. That's a lot of power. So I can't integrate with every single player out there. I have to figure out what the reach in the market is going to be and how fast we're going to be able to get those megawatts to Hydro Quebec so that we can respect our engagements.
If I may add
Great.
a point to that, which is something that David referred to earlier, what we've seen in the market is a lot of hardware companies are really good at making hardware and some embedded software, but when it comes to cloud integrations or some of the best practices in terms of identity management, telemetry, time series data management, some of them were a bit lacking on that front. So if ever you're able to kind of up your platform so that it becomes easily integratable, then the decision for a Hilo becomes a lot simpler because it comes and reduces the cost of integration dramatically, which makes the decision that much more easy to take.
Yeah, and there's a part of that that's on us, right? We need to publish a standard way of integrating with Hilo, and we're working on that. So we have, Sheriff said we grew quickly. We did, but we're still a small team. We're still a startup. So there's a lot of stuff to be done in terms of documentation and openness standards. So really my objective is to get there as quickly as possible so that we can put that well, we can put the workload back on the customers that want to integrate rather than us having to talk to people one-to-one, which is very time consuming.
Great, thank you for that. And just encouraging in the last few minutes here for any other questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand under the reactions there and pose your question live. I think I see a couple of other questions that might be better directly sent to Sharif around, integrating commercial buildings and if that might be a part of it. So I'll encourage you, Vince, to connect offline with our speakers. And also, Philippe, I can see specific solution there in the chat that you'd love to see integrated as well within Hilo. So I'll encourage you to connect with David and Sharif as well. And thank you so much, Sean, in the chat as well for showing all the great back end around Azure and how that's been a critical part of all of this. So last call for any other questions, comments in the chat, in the Q&A, or if you want to raise your hand, now's your chance before we start to wrap up. We'll wait a moment, that's fine, as people formulate their ideas. Okay, checking the Q&A. Thank you. How responsive is the comms and reaction times between Hydro Quebec, DERMS, and the energy systems? And are there any contingencies should there be a delay within the defined parameters in your agreements and collaborations? Maybe you can take a stab at that really briefly.
That's a great question, and it's one of the most complex challenges that we have to solve for, right? No system is perfect. Every system can go down. So of course, to mitigate against that, you have stochastical solutions. You can scale across a huge number of devices and keep a buffer in those number of devices in case you lose connectivity to some of them, then you still have the capacity that you need in the others. Or you can also go horizontal and you can go multi-cloud and you can mitigate against the risks at that level. We're looking at all the strategies. And again, to my point earlier in the talk, risk taking is about figuring out what your exposure is. When we're talking about 1,000 customers, when we're talking about 20,000 customers, when we're talking about 300,000 customers, we're not looking at the same system design or the same architectural design. So there was a second part to that question, which I forgot. What was it?
Yeah, I'll pull it up here. And the second piece, very briefly, as we were going to finish right on time for everyone, is are there any contingencies should there be a delay in those parameters?
Yeah, the contingency is always, on the utility side to buy electricity on the spot market elsewhere, just as if there is an equipment failure or something goes offline. You never want to get there. Before getting there, you want to have that contingency built into your infrastructure. And I think there was a question also about latency in there or the constraints. Yeah. So we're looking for a sub 1 minute latency for end-to-end ingestion into the system. That's our target, which we're currently achieving. And in terms of user experience, we're looking at a sub 3 second end-to-end command application. So when somebody does something in their mobile app, you want that to get to the device within 3 seconds at the most, and we're well within those parameters. And that's the 95th percentile value that we're looking for.
And
Great, thank you.
If I may
Very
add
briefly, Shruti.
there,
Yeah,
very briefly there. Part of the solution is to run as much of the control systems on edge as possible. So you can't depend on somebody's internet connection in their homes, even in commercial buildings either. So that's one of the key things that you should be looking at. And then measuring delay in a distributed system like that with hardware is not a trivial task. And if anybody wants to talk about how to do that, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. But I would stick it to there.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, we did put, I think it was Sean, thank you, put Sharif's direct link to his LinkedIn there in the chat, so you can all click on that and send him lots of messages. So I'm gonna conclude things, kind of wrap things up, and get everything finished up on time if you have other meetings in the rest of your days. So I just want to thank both of our speakers today for the excellent dialogue, the insights shared today. As a reminder to all of you, we've recorded this. We're going to put this on the Quest Canada website after today. And a big thank you to our sponsor, today's sponsor, Microsoft. And most importantly, thanks to all of you for joining and participating today. If you'd like to learn more about how to get involved in Quest Canada and our Smart Energy Communities mission, feel free to reach out to me or visit our website at questcanada.org. And with that, this concludes today's webcast event. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much for attending, and all the best. Thank you.
Merci, Eric. Thank you
very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.